Now this is Radio TV Phono Nut, and we have this Sears Silvertone record player from about 1952 that we're going to try to resurrect. This is a one-tube wonder. First thing you'll notice, the plug is shot. We need to replace that. Here's the underside. I have no idea who made this for Sears. The chassis number prefix is 639, and that's not Waters Conley. I think their number was 137, and they made many phonographs for Sears, but I don't know what 639 cross-references to. But as you can see, just your typical little single-tube chassis. The cover's still in place, but the retaining screws are missing, so that tells me somebody's been in here. As best I can tell, it's all original under here. The only thing I see that may be an upgrade is the tone arm wiring. It looks a little bit too new to be from the early 50s. And the cartridge here is one of those flat metal crystal cartridges with a finishing nail for a needle in it. The cartridge looks like a later replacement from Japan, which tells us this thing was in use up until the 60s, and I'm sure even by now this cartridge is dead. So let's put a plug on here and see what happens. And oh, by the way, I have the case gluing back together. It was starting to come apart, and I'm starting to find out that wood glue and clamps are just as essential as your digital multimeter when it comes to these old electronics. Alright, here's our replacement plug, one that I found in my junk, and certainly looks period correct here. Now if you're wondering what this big resistor's for, that's the dropping resistor for the motor. In later designs they used a 90 volt motor in series with the heater of a 25L6 tube, which added up to 115 volts. Well, in this case, they're using a regular 115 volt motor with a 50L6 tube with this big honking resistor in series with it. Well, whatever works. Alright, here we are plugged in, so let's run the smoke test. Yeah, bumpity bump 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 from a drive wheel that's all dented up. I think this is one that uses two wheels actually, and I don't particularly care for this kind of mechanism, and I'll show you why before the end of this video. Yeah, it sounds like I'm getting nothing from the cartridge. Getting some needle talk, but that's about it. Okay, the amplifier is working. So the problem is definitely a dud cartridge, so we'll just replace that with an 89T cartridge and be done. Okay, go out of focus on me, why don't you? Well, it's still going to go out of focus. But yeah, this is indeed a Japanese replacement cartridge from the 60s, and of course it's stone cold dead now. Now that's better. Now I'm sure I could send this off to West Tech Services and have it rebuilt for about $60, but we're not going to do that on something that's probably going to wind up on the Facebook baby clothes and cell phone pages for $20. That's the reason I'm not really going all out on this. Okay, your lock button works on your car. You can quit pushing the button now. We don't want to hear your horn all day. Okay, I found one of the little red cartridges. This is one of the modern fan steel ones. It was in a bag of stuff that someone gave me. This is one of the single-sided LP cartridges. I'm really not a fan of them because they only reproduce one side of a stereo record, but for something that's being resurrected, I really don't care. Now, back in the 90s, I could buy the gold-colored dual-tip cartridges for $5 and some change, and I could get a holder for about the same amount. Well, that was a good, inexpensive means of resurrecting some of these old record players, but now that the holders are hard to get, well, I've got a bag of holders. It was in the same batch of stuff that this cartridge came from, but now that the cartridges are no longer made and the new old stock ones are $25 to $30 a piece, that's really not so economical for resurrection. So I need to find a source of these somewhere cheap. Maybe somebody will put a whole sleeve of them up on eBay for $10 like they did a few months back, and I bought them all, and of course it didn't take me long to use them all. Alright, we get some noise from the speaker now, so let's see what happens. Alright, that's pretty good. Okay, just checking some voltages on the amplifier to see what they look like. Cathode voltage for the output tube. If the meter probe will make connection here. 6 volts, that's good. I bet that cathode resistor has gone up. Alright, our B voltage, 120 volts, that's good. Okay, 90 volts on the screen grid, 116 volts on the audio output tube plate. Okay, the cathode bias resistor is 150 ohms, or at least that's what it's supposed to be. And it reads, once again, if I can get my meter probe in here to make connection, it reads almost 200 ohms. And the screen dropping resistor is supposed to be 8.2K, but it's 10.3K. So yeah, that one's up a bit too. And then this capacitor here is our chassis isolation capacitor, and this one buried under here is for our tone control. This, of course, is the selenium rectifier. Oh yeah, what about this resistor here off of the selenium rectifier? It's supposed to be 100 ohms, and that resistor is 159 ohms. See, in order for this to be right, it needs to be totally gutted and gone through. About the only parts that should remain are the potentiometers, the tube, and the tube socket. Everything else under here is out of tolerance and technically needs to go bye-bye. Okay, I'll remove the platter. I have not done a going over of this drive mechanism. All I've done is repack this spindle with grease. I did a little light wipe down here to get some of the crud off. I cleaned the 2 wheels here with alcohol, and I put a few drops of oil on the top and bottom of the motor. Now, that is not the proper way to do it. The proper way would be to completely dismantle this, clean everything, oil is needed, put it back together, have these wheels rebuilt, and then that brings to mind why I do not like this kind of mechanism. Now, when this record player was made, they were transitioning from 78 only to 3-speed models. In fact, when this was made, you could still buy a 78 only portable, and they basically use the same motors in both types of record players. So what they're doing here, you have a standard motor like what you'd find in a 78 player, and that's transferring energy to this turret here. You can see the rubber wheel here, and then this is stepped here to transfer energy to this main wheel. So when you're in 78, the wheel makes contact with this bottom rung on the turret, 45 the middle rung, and then 33 the top rung. Now where the problem comes in is you can put the lever in between speeds here, if I can get it to cooperate, and that moves the main wheel away from this turret to protect it, but there's nothing at all to retract this turret from the motor shaft when the record player is not in use. So if this rubber on this turret stays up against this motor shaft too long, it's going to develop a notch because there's no way to retract it. Now, I could send these wheels off and have them rebuilt, about 30 or 35 a piece, but unless I use this thing on a regular basis, at least turned it on and let it run a few minutes, our newly rebuilt turret would develop a notch in it from resting up against this motor shaft. Another type of early drive mechanism for 3-speed used the thin turntable platter like you'd see on a 78 player, and instead of this steps turret, they had 3 individual turrets for 33, 45, and 78 driving a main idler wheel. And those are even more expensive to have rebuilt. The more rubber, the more it costs. Alright, here's our 89T cartridge holder. Technically, I need to replace this wiring here because it's old and the insulation is very easily melted. Whenever I was soldering the leads to the cartridge holder, the insulation was melting back on me. And also the conductor, the center conductor is old and fragile, so this is not going to take too many flippings back and forth. So technically what I need to do with this is, when the time comes, when I have more time to fool with this needs to be gone through from one end to the other and done right. But then if I did that, I couldn't sell it for $15 or $20. Actually, I'm probably not going to sell this anyway because I can see it now the way it is. Somebody comes to look at it, I turn it on, it craps out. I actually had that happen the other day on an early 60s symphonic that I had gone through. Somebody was coming to look at it. I wanted $30 for the thing. I had that record player and a caliphone out, hoping I could sell them the caliphone, but they wanted the other one because it looked more vintage. Okay. So I turned it on to show it to them, and it played, but it just didn't sound right. It wasn't very loud, and when you advanced the volume control past about halfway, it distorted and dropped out altogether, and the longer it stayed on, the worse it got. Well, that made me look like an idiot, and it's very embarrassing when you have something that's supposed to be working and somebody comes to look at it, and it craps out on you, and let's let the airplane fly over. But long story short, he agreed to buy it as it was and paid me what I wanted for it, which was good. He said he knew a little something about electronics and he thought he could fix it. I told him it was probably a gassy output tube, which is about the only thing I think it could be, seeing as how I had replaced everything else. But yeah, I could just see it now, somebody coming and look at this and either blowing up while they're sitting here looking at it, or they pay me $15 or $20 for it, take it home, and it blows up in a week, and then they're back on my butt with it. To me, if I buy something for $15 or $20, then I realize anything could happen. But most people today have what I call the Walmart mentality, and you know, they think they can buy something for $5 at a yard sale, and it ought to be warranted. In fact, I witnessed somebody buy a lamp for $2 at a yard sale, and when they got it home, it didn't work. They brought it back, demanded their $2 back. They probably spent more in gas to bring it back over there than what they got out of the deal. But that just goes to show how stupid some of these morons are. Alright, we're back together and working. I'm going to let this thing run about an hour and see if by some chance that idler turret wheel thingy-madoodle will smooth out. I kind of have my doubts that it will, given how long it's probably been in that position, but we can try. Microgroove 78. just to re-emphasize, the only electronic components I replaced to get this going was the cartridge and the AC power plug. I did not replace one capacitor, one resistor, one selenium rectifier, no tubes, nothing in the amplifier. Now, how long it'll work like this, I don't know. It might work for another 20 years, or it might die in the next 5 minutes. Well, I came down here to demonstrate an LP. I got sidetracked earlier, and now the motor won't start. All it does is buzz. So, what did I say earlier about things going haywire? So let me go pull the platter off and see if I can get this motor started. Okay, yeah, the shaft had seized, and I just had to wiggle it back and forth to get everything lined back up, and it took off. So yeah, that's why you have to take these things apart and do it right. Okay, here we are with a 10-inch LP, something from the era that might have been played on such a record player. And for something, for a little one-tube wonder, this thing doesn't sound too bad, especially considering it has all of those 70-year-old out-of-tolerance parts in it. And yeah, I know the fact that I didn't change the selenium rectifier, and I didn't change the capacitors, and I didn't even change so much as one resistor. That will make all of the cap-changing fanatics crap in their diaper. Because you have to do all that. You have to change all of those parts before you even apply power to the thing, because there's just no way it can work without those parts changed. In fact, if you don't change those parts, it'll blow up on you. I mean, all jokes aside, yes, those parts really need to be changed, but, you know, for what we're doing, they don't have to be changed, and it proves that this stuff can still work on old parts. It's just, how long is it going to work, and how reliable is it going to be? And like I think I've already said, it might play out in 5 minutes. It might run for another 20 years like this. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering why my video looks like something from the past with the old camera, well, in a sense, we are using the old camera, not the same one we had, because it conked on us. But we're using one just like it that someone gave me, and I just decided to have a little fun and shoot this video with the old camera just to see how well it would work. And because I'm really kind of pressed for time, and the files from this old camera, I can process them a lot quicker through Windows Movie Maker than I can the files from the newer camera through the other program. Whereas I can shoot this video on this camera and do it on Windows Movie Maker in 15 minutes or less. The same video on the newer camera on the other program would take over an hour to do. So that's the reason we're doing the video with the old camera. And of course the majority of future videos will be done with the newer camera, but it is nice to have this older one as backup, and for less important situations where I might be pressed for time or whatever. Now, speaking of pressed for time, I know my YouTube videos have been lacking here lately, and the ones I have been uploading have not been as thorough as what you've seen in years past, and hopefully in the coming year I'll be able to get back to doing some stuff. No need in going into everything on here, but just really hadn't had time to do a lot of in-depth electronic stuff here lately, but like I said, hopefully that'll change. And with that said, I wish everyone a Merry Christmas. Hope you have a safe holiday, and I wish everybody a healthy and prosperous 2022. But it really does amaze me that you can have something this old and do the minimum amount of work to it, and it still performs better than a Crosley Cruiser. And one day I just might very well go through this and overhaul it properly and hang on to it, because I know once I go through it properly, there's no way I'd ever recover my investment out of it. So if I'm going to overhaul it, I might as well just overhaul it and keep it and enjoy it. And if I do sell it like it is, I'll make it very clear to whoever buys it what they're getting, and if it blows up in a week, I don't want to hear nothing out of you about it. Alright, there we go. Enough about the Silvertone record player, and hopefully after the new year starts, we'll get into some more stuff.